Fantastic. Okay, we're getting a lot of beeps. That means people are still joining, which is great. Welcome, welcome, welcome for everyone who is already waiting in the lobby. We're going to give it one more minute and we'll be starting at 12:03 on the dot. Just making sure we have everyone in the building. Great. Okay, fantastic. We are going to kick off now. So hello and welcome to our first ever Live and Breathe webinar. Rather than me going on and waxing lyrical for a while, I'm sure you guys want to get straight down to the business. But there are three quite important things I have to let you know before we get going. So firstly, I'm Ben, and that's Ed, and you'll be hearing from me a little bit and Ed quite a lot. The second thing is we're going to be presenting for about 20 minutes. Then we're opening for questions. You'll notice at the top of your screen, there's a little Q&A button. That's where we'd like you to copy in your questions for us. We'll choose some select questions at the end of the presentation. Actually, sorry, there's probably a fourth thing. Right at the end, you're going to see some digital QR codes. It's our very own little shortcut for today. So if you do want to get in touch with us with either Ed or I afterwards, do give that a little bit of a whirl. So without further ado, let's kick off. So the reason we're here today, the reason we're gathered here today is because of a quite frightening little data point. 81% or almost 8 out of 10 brands could disappear completely and absolutely nobody would notice. Why is this the case? It's quite simple in some ways and quite complex in other ways, but essentially there's just far too much noise, there's too much competition, and the lack of energy and effort required on shoppers these days to kind of work their way around and absorb that many messages, information, decisions is quite difficult. And I know loads of you guys who we work with and new brands on the call, work with very, very special brands. So I'm sure that kind of stat hits quite hard. It certainly made us at L&B kind of sit up and take notice. Another interesting thing we're seeing is the shopper journey. It's no longer really a neat kind of carefully manicured path for your shoppers to follow. Us strategists used to be able to get away with blocking out some boxes lined up on a page and tell you that that's how your shoppers were going to move through all of your comms and messages. But actually, shoppers these days exist in a much more chaotic ecosystem. It's easy for brands to waste time and effort thinking that all their shoppers are going to go along this straight path. But instead, the reality is shoppers are going to meet you wherever they want. And it's your, I guess, kind of our job to make sure that we are there to meet them and we're not wasting our time covering areas where we really don't matter to them. So the truth really is everyone is a shopper all of the time. It's really difficult to pinpoint the exact moment someone becomes a shopper or is not a shopper. Your kind of old school retail media is now just media because it's messaging, it's content, it's stuff in this rather large ecosystem. And finally, the technology that you guys have to offer and we partner with and use in all of our work is making it slightly easier to connect across that ecosystem. So I guess what we're going to run through today, and just before I pass over to Ed, we're going to be showing how we think shortcuts are being put into action, and avoiding being part of that 81% means that you really must focus on engineering these shopper shortcuts. And I guess 3 ways in which we're going to run through today, you'll see later on. Step 1 is how do you secure recognition within this myriad of noise? How do you pull your shoppers' triggers? How do you matter to them in the moment? And step 3, how do you really create those brilliant experiences that make a difference in those complex ecosystems? So this is Ed going to run through on how to engineer shopper shortcuts.
Thanks, Ben. So let's start off by expanding a little bit on that context for shoppers, because being a shopper today means being overloaded by a tidal wave of choice and the noise of brand communication. You've got more brands than ever. There's this ocean of choice of products, brands that really functionally do a pretty good job. But how do you choose between 3,000 different options for AA batteries or 11 varieties of something as incredibly niche as Manuka honey? And then there's more ways to buy, surrounded by these opportunities to make purchases. You've got social commerce growing really rapidly, now already is about a fifth of online sales. But social is a channel that people use for entertainment and connection, as well as to make purchases. And then you've got connected TVs, which offer a shoppable ad that creates a chance to buy in a channel that previously has been the preserve of, I suppose, brand building and above the line. And then you've got retail specific channels that will pop up all the time. So Tesco in the UK, that's recently launched a new marketplace, which gives shoppers an alternative destination to the likes of Amazon. And there are just so many decisions to make in life. More and more people feel that deciding what's best to buy is getting harder, particularly with big purchases. There's lots of information to wade through. But then even when you think about sort of the smaller considerations in life, these basic purchases about, do you buy extra virgin olive oil when it's sort of £8-9 a bottle? There's more decisions to make there about those basics. So when shoppers are overloaded with choice, which is all the time, these decisions that they're presented with are things we are naturally hardwired to avoid, because ultimately they just burn up calories. So faced with this this overwhelm, this being overloaded, shoppers fall back on mental shortcuts to get them to what matters, rather than having to make considered decisions. Now, some of these shortcuts that they use to get to what they want are hardwired, and we know that from behavioral science. As an example, so social proof, I'm sure you're all familiar with this. If something's popular, it's shorthand for it must be good. And that's why conversion on e-com websites with customer reviews is better than those that don't have those reviews. People are also risk averse, and generally, most people are looking for good enough, not perfect. So basically, the shortcut there is, I bought it before and it was fine. Why take the risk of trying something new? So people have quite a small repertoire of products from a particular category, maybe 1 or 2 or 3. And that's why it's hard to get your brand onto someone's repertoire. We're also really heavily biased to the first thing we see. We think that the first thing we see on a list is more important than everything else, and it's the one we're most likely to remember. And this plays out in the volume of traffic that you see websites receiving based on where they show up in search results.
So a lot of the work we've been doing recently as an agency is about looking at the very latest testing tools that we can do on specifically e-assets. We were speaking with one of our partners recently who work with one of the biggest supermarkets in the UK, and they tested loads and loads of permutations of their PDP assets to try and see what effect it would have on dwell time and then click through. And incredibly, a tiny, almost unnoticeable change in copy and a slight positioning of imagery led to almost a 50k marginal revenue boost on single products. So you can really see when you're engineering those shopper shortcuts and extrapolating those across the ecosystem, it can really make a huge difference from a commercial perspective.
Absolutely. So while you can work with these hardwired shortcuts, and you absolutely should, there's other more powerful shortcuts that are implanted into people's brains by brands, and that's what we're most concerned with today. And often these shortcuts can open up your brand to new audiences. So, for example, people want to get cheap cinema tickets. They want to save money, wherever they can. So, as a price comparison service, being a shortcut to save money on cinema tickets is instantly a bit more distinctive than one that focuses only on its products. Or people looking for a way to relax after work. So this is a shortcut that Lego has been engineering recently.
And we really like this one when we were looking at it. It's really clever shortcut engineering from Lego. They found an insight that, of course, actually their shoppers really enjoy playing with their kids' Lego. So they engineered a shortcut, cutting out the middleman, i.e. the kids, in this case, the children themselves, to create a quicker shortcut to purchase, and I guess making some adults feel less sheepish about buying Lego in the process. Really a bit of a double whammy.
And it's these similarly, sort of TikTok have been engineering a shortcut to being a search solution, and it's this existing behavior that they've seen in their audience and their customers that they're then just broadcasting more widely. Again, kind of opening up their TikTok to a new audience. So it's painfully simple, really. If your brand isn't an obvious choice to a simple shortcut to get people to what they want, what they value, they will just filter it out and ignore it. Now, brands don't have a right to exist. It has to be earned. And this is one of the reasons why so much communication actually receives so little attention, because it doesn't actually offer a beneficial shortcut. But slightly complicate things, as Ben mentioned earlier on. Problem today is, like we said, kind of you can't just trigger purchases in so-called retail channels, or what are traditionally seen as retail channels. You need to be making your brand easier to buy at every interaction. So whether your audience is sat on the sofa watching TV, or they're actively kind of shopping in a store or on an e-com site. Of course, we don't want you to just take our word for it. This conversation within the industry, it clearly points to the fact there's a revolution going on in what we currently call retail media, but in reality is going to merge with other media. And the notion of kind of shopper as this sort of separate silo is really going with it. Brand building needs to happen in commerce channels, and creating shortcuts to purchase triggers needs to happen in so-called above the line as well.
So Ed has kind of showed us that these shortcuts are critical. Some of them exist already, some of them are hardwired, but I guess the really important thing today is for us to share the wisdom on actually how can you engineer these shopper shortcuts. And really this is what we do at Live and Breathe. We try and spot commerce opportunities and then build experiences to capitalize on them, which really means finding those opportunities to build a shortcut and then engineering them into the ecosystem.
So as we sort of headlined earlier on, the first step in building shopper shortcuts is secure recognition. This is all about distinctive brand assets. So they're there to deliver recognition, which means you avoid the first layer of that filter, which is simply not being noticed in the first place. But distinctive brand assets do a bit more than that. They provide that recognition, but they also create attention, because we give attention to things we recognize. So they give you this sort of foot in the door to communicating a reason to buy. And of course, DBAs, they're more than just a logo. Strong brands have this range of assets that can actually stand in for their logo. And the more variety you have, the easier it is for people to recognize your brand. Of course, you might be thinking, okay, yeah, that's obvious. We know about DBAs, but they're not your usual assets anymore. They are very much evolving. And one of the really interesting areas we're seeing coming through is in the use of personality, so manner and tone as a distinctive brand asset. So delivering communication that generally has that distinctive tone is a way of creating an asset, a brand asset that delivers recognition. So whether it's this sort of uncompromising boldness of Nike, or the humour of Iron Brew, or the intelligent naivety of Oatly, these give your communication that extra level of recognition. More interesting still is sound as a way to gain recognition. So we live in a world of partial attention. People are never looking at what they're supposed to be looking at, or never looking at what we really want them to look at as marketers. So dual screening is normal, of course, but even when people walk around the supermarket, they're looking at their phone for their shopping list, and then their attention can be pulled off by somewhere else by a notification. So sound becomes this really powerful way to gain attention from these kind of chronically distracted people. And you can see that playing through, by the way, how much more effective ads on TikTok are that have sound, because it's this much more immersive platform. But sound's sort of woven into all our lives really these days. 25% of internet users listen to podcasts. About 100 million people in the US have a smart speaker, and brands are starting to use directional speakers within their stores. So some examples of brands that are kind of capitalizing on that. You've got the delivery app, Grab, which has created a Sonic logo, which distinguishes its notifications from other users on that will come up on people's phones. Coke, very kind of boldly, but of course it's Coke, so they should be bold. They're working to own the sound of opening a soft drink bottle, or listening to kind of the fizz of a soft drink. MasterCard has launched a Sonic logo, which takes advantage of the dominance of card payments. So every time you scan your card, you hear the MasterCard logo. And Domino's is putting huge weight behind communicating its Sonic Domino hoo-hoo asset. So I've now won my bet for doing that. So that's distinctive brand assets. That's all about recognition and gaining that extra bit of attention. Let's talk about shopper triggers. So purchase triggers, also known as category entry points, they're the reason people buy. It's the job your brand is hired to do. And as we sort of touched on with the likes of Lego, it might not always be the one you maybe first intended. So this is why being close to people's real behavior is so vital. So as an example with beverages, the obvious one, buy a beverage because you're thirsty, or maybe I want something with a meal, but also it might be when you're going on a car journey, or you need an energy boost, or you need to relieve boredom, or a treat for yourself, or for your child. The most successful brands engineer a shortcut to multiple high volume triggers. So high volume one, big one, looking at running with Nike. So they're building shortcuts to running. So whether that's with more serious runners through the likes of its Run Club app, or actually with people who really don't want to go running, such as the activation it did, which encouraged reluctant runners to get moving by making the brand part of a Pokemon Go kind of AR game, which this audience were already taking part in. And of course, tapping into many triggers, and McDonald's are the masters of engineering vast array of shortcuts to purchase triggers. So whether it's simply having chicken and coffee in their range to divert people from KFC and Starbucks, providing options for adults in the form of salad, or communicating McDonald's as a place to go after a night out. And then there's those more emotional sort of purchase triggers, which, so for example, being somewhere to spend time with your kids.
And Ed's absolutely right. It gets really interesting here when you look at the thinking and the data behind some of these decision making in terms of triggers from McDonald's, and they actually test the regularity with which they need to introduce new menu items to defend that shortcut, that many trigger shortcut from being eroded. At the moment, apparently globally, it's about once every 5 weeks. So you'll see a specific new menu item once every 5 weeks. One of the latest ones I've seen in the UK is the Skittles McFlurry that I know made quite a big impact on me personally. I would highly recommend anyone that hasn't tried that. But really, it is important to make sure not only you keep the volume of your triggers high, but also make sure you're constantly evolving them in order to make sure that they're not eroding over time.
And it's important, of course, as well, to look at new triggers as well, especially new triggers for the category. They can be really powerful. And again, not necessarily what you might have planned for. So as an example, alcohol-free beer Lucky Saint in the UK is available in a supermarket meal deal. That's alongside sandwiches and salads and crisps and soft drinks. So that's a huge new shortcut to a purchase trigger for non-alcoholic beer. So brands that have engineered shortcuts to lots of functional triggers then look beyond those and start to weave themselves more into culture. And these days, people want connection with others who share the same interests as them, no matter where they are in the world, so they can really get deep into that niche. And this is why fandoms have become so powerful culturally. So fast-growing brands now are tapping into those fandoms to open up new audiences. And these fandoms, they come in all shapes and sizes. You might not think of people who like the artist Keith Haring as a fandom, but they are. So targeting a fandom can open up a completely new audience. So for example, with Metallica and Fortnite, so working to increase the overlap between their audiences. Elf and Liquid Death both work hard on their communities. So a collaboration between them is going to bring two really engaged audiences together. And Crocs have really built their success in the last few years on collaborating with brands with lots of with strong fandoms, which make their shoes appealing to new audiences. Working fandom can give an existing audience another reason to buy. So Lego have long been doing this, tapping into children's obsession over films. And I'm sure, despite the amount of both Lego and Frozen items my daughter has in her bedroom, she would love some Frozen Lego. She hasn't quite got that particular overlap yet. And our third step is about building brilliant brand experiences. So you probably thought I was going to talk maybe about physical brand experiences. This is a nice one from Oakley and Malibu. But what we want to do for the last sort of 2-3 minutes of the presentation is to focus on more hybrid and digital experiences that are relevant to the always-on shopper that we've been talking about. So Oh My Cream is a clean beauty concept store. What they've done is brought the idea of a pop-up to their e-com site. So what the brand does is provide an opportunity for discovery by launching a 6-month pop-up, which showcases brands that have never been seen in its physical stores. And this is a really effective way of scaling that brand experience that a pop-up delivers. There's really smart but kind of small ways almost you can do this as well through UX. So as an example, Calm takes kind of high friction moments in its app experience, like waiting for a meditation to load, and actually use that to reinforce what the brand's known about. So users promise to take deep breaths while they wait for a meditation to load, rather than being impatient and potentially actually maybe navigating away from the app. It actually offers them a mini mindfulness experience, so creates extra value for the user. And then there's more kind of unexpected experiences. So this was an experience from Morrison's that was created by Live and Breathe. During lockdown, students living on campuses were relying on takeaway to avoid visiting large supermarkets. So using our research and insight team, what we did was identify influential students on campus, and we worked with them to activate that micro community that was around them. So the students were supplied with door drops of Morrison's groceries. They produced a nice community-friendly meal and content to go with it, which then nudged their community to visit their local Morrison's. And engineering a shortcut for Morrison's as a quick and convenient source of tasty meals really supported local store sales, delivering some excellent results. So in summary, engineering shopper shortcuts is massively important to make sure you're not part of that 81% of brands that just are forgettable, that people really don't kind of give a second thought to. Now these shortcuts, they come in all shapes and forms, and opportunities to engineer them are only expanding across the ecosystem. And our job at Live and Breathe is to pinpoint these commerce moments, those moments when you can engineer a shortcut and capitalize them in a way that no one else is doing.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, guys, for coming along. You'll notice or remember that I mentioned our little shortcut of our own right at the beginning of the call. So if you follow either of those QR codes, you will be able to follow the digital footprint of Ed and I. You'll be able to access our LinkedIns, but also get in touch with us if there are any further conversations or questions you'd like to ask. At the moment, it looks like we don't have any questions in the Q&A. We've hopefully got one coming through. I think we're having a bit of a technical thing. Great. Okay, here's the first question. Okay. Given the complex nature of the modern consumer journey that you described, how can traditional brick and mortar stores use triggers to avoid consumers using their space and expertise only for research and then buy from a pure online player at a reduced price? Really, really good question. And again, it comes back to understanding what those commerce moments are and how you can buy or build those triggers to really capitalize on those moments through kind of testing, through really understanding your target audience in terms of your shopper, understanding their behavior, understanding their activity, understanding their kind of previous purchase behavior. You can make sure you're building experiences that fit them. For some brands, in-store bricks and mortar experiences aren't going to be right. For some stores or some brands, bricks and mortar experiences are going to be fine to kind of educate, but not necessarily to purchase, and they'll need a kind of pure online offering as well. For others, D2C, pure online offering might be the correct thing. It's all about testing and really understanding your consumer as much as possible before you get going.
Next question, which has come through on the chat from Joe Wilkes. What's the biggest challenge for brands in the new world of the shopper ecosystem? I think almost the biggest challenge really, and sort of the one we're always most concerned with, is there's a huge amount of things you could be doing. Um, the key to it is really understanding what you should be doing, because you could just spread your resources far and wide and end up also almost not having an impact. So I think the key to kind of cracking that in terms of what you should be doing is understanding who you're really going to talk to, who's most interested in what you have to offer, and then where are they? What are the most kind of impactful points you can reach them in? That's a case of getting close to the audience, so through qual, through quant, and making sure that you're in those most impactful moments.
Really good question from Rosie as well. What do you do to pinpoint those commerce moments that no one else is? Again, it comes down to understanding the status quo and then reacting in such a way that makes you a bit different. We work with a lot of challenger brands that, quite frankly, can't compete in lots of the various touch points and channels amongst the ecosystems. So it's really about understanding, okay, firstly, what does our target audience, what does our shopper want? What can we give them? Is that already being given? Is that shortcut already dominated by one of the bigger players or a very high volume of players? And it's about then finding, okay, we can play in a similar space, but how do we do it differently? How do we put a different trigger? How do we group another set of triggers together? So really, it's about pinpointing what our shoppers actually really want, removing those elements that are already being dominated by other players or indeed the volume of other players, and then making sure that we're looking at white spaces. We're looking at those opportunities that haven't quite been taken yet.
Just sort of building on that as well, Ben, there's this kind of a similar question around where should you start when it comes to identifying the opportunities to make your brand a shortcut. So the other element which we sort of touched on was distinctive brand assets. And that's about making sure that you actually understand, is your brand already sort of, are any of your brand assets already well known across your audience? How I recognize them, and actually then developing a really specific strategy to build those assets, probably focusing on one or two to begin with, depending on the size of your brand and the amount of budget you've got. And then as you establish those, making sure you're continually using them, continually refreshing them, so you become instantly recognized for that asset.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, well, we're coming up to time. So one more reminder that if you like what you saw today and you'd like to have a bit more of a conversation, or you just want to hear Ed do his Domino's soundbite again, then please do scan the QR code and get in touch. We'll be reaching out with a copy of the presentation for you guys to read over again very, very shortly as well. Once again, thank you very much for attending and looking forward to talking again soon. Thanks, guys.
Bye.